Moccasin Trail, Chapter 9. But the next day the surveyor made his appearance, and the tree chopping was halted on both the Keith and Rutledge claims, while the official staking out began. This was entirely all right with Jim. He enjoyed his reprieve until he realized that Johnny had something on his mind, and the nearer the day drew for signing the papers, the larger that something seemed to grow. Jim didn't find out what it was until the final day of the surveyor's activities. Everyone gathered at the Rutledges for the noon meal, and Johnny, Rutledge, and the surveyor left immediately afterward for the measuring and staking of the Rutledges' last few acres. Jim hung around restlessly a while, listening to the girls' chatter, then calling Moccasin, started off through the woods that covered half the claim. A few minutes later, he heard the men's voices, and the clank of the chain, swerved away from them, and suddenly caught the sound of his own name. He stopped, halting Moccasin. Then, soundless as a shadow, he drifted closer. "Ain't had the chance to keep in practice," Johnny was saying stiffly. "Like he says, there was no books where he was, but it's him got to sign them papers, so I wondered." "No, I see. No, he don't have to sign in actual writing," the surveyor answered. "He can make his mark, and the clerk can witness. It'll be just as legal." Sure it will. That was Rutledge's voice, deep and reassuring. "Now don't be fretting about that, Johnny." The quiet tones faded along with the sound of the chain. After a moment, Jim wheeled and went his way. So Johnny was ashamed of him because he couldn't read and write, because he hadn't stuck around that farm and worried his head with Pa's figures and ABCs every night, long after sensible people had eaten their buffalo ribs and gone to sleep. Well, by Gore, there was plenty of learning that couldn't be found in bourgeois books. How to stalk a panther, or steal a horse, or how to keep the man smell off a trap, and throw a knife, and know what kind of Injuns were coming before they got there. How to live well and comfortable for years in a country where bourgeois starved or froze or lost their hair to the first Rapaho. But suddenly it was unendurable not to be able to write his name too. Maybe he could print it? Wah, a man wouldn't forget a simple thing like that, even if he hadn't tried it for years. Would he? Scowling to keep away a prickle of uncertainty, Jim stopped in his tracks and ripped a piece of bark off a nearby tree. Then he drew out his knife, and without allowing himself to wonder if it would come out right, he scratched big J. He looked at it belligerently. There, he hadn't forgotten at all. Johnny Keith's brother could do anything a bourgeois could do. Now what came next, if he wanted to write Jim? Must be M, from the way the words sounded. But it seemed like there ought to be something in the middle. Just JM was too short, wasn't it? He puzzled over it a while, then decided uneasily that JM was likely enough letters for a name that only took one grunt to say. Now for Keith. K. Wah, how did you write that sound? 10 minutes later, he flung the much scratched bark against the tree trunk, sheathed his knife, and set off furiously for the river. With a few quick practiced motions, he made a little raft of branches, and stripping, piled his clothes on it. Then he plunged into the cold running current, the raft trailing from a piece of vine clamped in his teeth, and Moccasin was swimming by his side. But the thing was still nagging at him when he and the dripping dog climbed the bank on the Keith side. He dressed, fished a lump of charcoal out of the dead fire, and sat for half an hour making scratchings on the back of a piece of old buffalo hide. Finally, he flung the hide away and stalked down through the willows and caught trout in brooding silence until the others pulled back across the river in the late afternoon. "Well, I swear," exploded Jonathan when Jim appeared suddenly, wading toward them through the shallows. "How do you get over here? Where'd you go?" He looked around and called. "What'd you do that for?" Jim grabbed the tow line of the raft and beached it with a jolt, hitching the rope around the nearest tree. "Well, how'd we know where you was?" demanded Sally. "You might have told somebody." Ain't used to telling nobody where I go or what I do. Don't reckon to get used to it either. Jonathan and Sally headed up the slope to the clearing, but Dan'l hung back. Hey, Jim, your hair's all wet. Did you swim that river? Sure. Cracky, I bet I could do it too. You know it? But Sis had never let me go swimming in the winter. Why, what's winter got to do with it? In Absaroka, warn't a week went by all year the boys weren't called out. Called out? Jim nodded. They was rivers thar too. Fast ones, cold ones. Somebody'd stick his head in your teepee. It might be black night, and he'd say, follow. The picture sprang vividly into his mind, and the sensations, creeping out, shivering with fearful excitement, to join the gathering crowd of boys. No telling where the strong young man ahead was leading so silently, or what he would require of you. It would be Eye of the Bear, or steals horses, or maybe hides his face, who always wore a buckskin mask to conceal his battle-torn jaws. He'd strip at the edge of the woods, and so would we, Jim went on huskily. Then he'd start running, and never stop till he'd done a flip-flop into the river, and swim a mile upstream, and by gor, we better follow. Winter or not, we learnt to swim dodgin' ice floes. Ice? But why? Makes you quick and tough besides, Jim added. It's handy to know how. Sometimes, when you get older, you gotta dodge other things in rivers. Like what? Like Sioux bullets. Cracky. Dan'l glanced uncertainly at the water. I want to be quick and tough too, but it looks awful cold. Why, thunder, this weather ain't nothing. Jim started up the bank toward the clearing. I've trapped beaver streams so cold your legs would freeze to the float stick if you weren't careful. Float stick? What's that? Jim halted. Why, the float stick. You ain't ever seen a beaver trap? No, you got one, Jim. Show me, will ya? The sun had sunk into a low bank of clouds, and the woods were dusky. It was just the right hour. Come on, Jim said suddenly. We're going to hunt up along that creek back yonder till we find a beaver sign. Then we're going to sink us a trap. He found his traps where he had cached them, in the dry hollow of a stump near the big oak tree. As he crossed the clearing to head for the woods, Dan'l, cavorting breathless with excitement at his heels, Jonathan looked up from the fire he was building. Dan'l, where are you off to? Just up the creek. It's all right. I'm with Jim. But it's supper time, protested Sally. Jim frowned impatiently and kept walking. It ain't supper time till you're hungry. I ain't hungry. But you will be later. Then I'll eat later. Me too, chimed in Dan'l loftily. I ain't hungry neither. Me and Jim, we got trapping to tend to. Jim plunged into the woods. Likely he ought to make the boy do like Sally wanted. Wah, forget it, he told himself. I hardly see the boy lately. He took his time to moving up the creek, teaching Dan'l to watch for tooth marks on the bark, for collections of twigs and mud, for any sign of a slide on the edge of a pool. He began the boy's training in walking silently, too, in the fine new moccasins, the gaudiest in Willamette Falls. Jim had paid a plea for them the other day over Sally's disapproving protests. They were half a mile up creek from the river when he spotted unmistakably fresh beaver sign. He stopped. This was not the half-demolished old dam or deserted lodge he'd expected to show Dan'l. That branch wedged between the two rocks midstream had been gnawed, not broken, and no earlier than yesterday. He moved on quickly, almost forgetting the boy behind him, and found a track, and a moment later a slide entering a half-dammed pool. Dan'l was tugging at his sleeve now, pointing excitedly. Jim nodded approval. The boy's eye was quick. He beckoned and led the way into the stream, unslinging one of the traps. Beaver still left in this valley, trapped and retrapped for years by Hudson's Bay Frenchmen. He could hardly believe it. He motioned the boy to watch while he sank the first trap. made it fast with the trap pole and attached a float stick. The pungent smell of castoreum rose on the air as he uncorked his horn and smeared the bait onto the bent twig. Splashing all the man's scent into oblivion, he went on upstream to another likely spot, and this time handed the trap to Dan'l. Do it all by myself? Breathed the boy in a tense whisper. When Jim nodded, he looked scared, and then fell resolutely to the work. Jim grinned, wondering if a thing had ever been done more carefully. He helped Dan'l jam the trap pole firmly into the mud of the creek bottom, then smiled as the boy surreptitiously rubbed a little castoreum onto himself as he baited the twig. One person, at least, liked the way Jim Keith smelled. When they had again splashed out their tracks and were a safe distance away downstream, Dan'l let out his breath in a tremulous sigh of excitement. Did I do it right? He asked anxiously. Yeah. Just exactly right? I didn't forget nothing? Nope. Dan'l took another long breath. He sounded and looked as if he were about to explode. I've learned a side of things from you, Jim, he said, his voice solemn with pride. I betcha I wouldn't learned half as much in a whole year of doing arithmetic. Jim walked a while in silence, then slowed his steps to a loiter. Pa teach you to do arithmetic? He asked idly. Oh, cracky, yes, groaned Dan'l. And then Johnny after Pa died. I bet I spent more time working long division than anybody in the world. Don't reckon you're much good at writing, though. Say, I reckon I am, too. That's lots easier in figures. It is, huh? Let's see you write your name. Jim found a loose strip of bark, and he tore it off, handing it to Dan'l with a lump of charcoal he'd dropped into his pouch earlier. Dan'l rose to the bait instantly, seizing the charcoal with a swagger and drawing Daniel Keith in bold flourishes on the smooth underside of the bark. Not bad, admitted Jim. It was actual writing there before him instead of the block print he had expected. As far as he was concerned, it might as well have been Chinese. Very casually, he added, Let's see you write mine now. He didn't breathe again until Dan'l finished writing, and the bark was back in his own hands. Reckon you'll grow up to be a judge, he commented. Shucks, said Dan'l. I'd rather grow up to be a trapper like you. You think I could, Jim? Maybe. You learn fast. Come on, we best get moving. The bark went into his patch as soon as the boy's back was turned. It burned there like a hot coal all the time they were walking back to the clearing, all the time he was frying fish for their belated supper, all the time they were eating. He barely heard Sally's fuming about Dan'l being off in the woods after dark, or noticed Jonathan's thoughtful manner. He waited, outwardly calm, until they had all gone to bed, and until all sounds of restlessness from the wagon had quieted. Then he moved to the fire, shoved in the logs until a blaze sprang up bright, and fetched the piece of buffalo hide he'd flung away in anger that afternoon. Rubbing off the scrawled markings, he took the bark and charcoal from his pouch and set grimly to work. The first rays of dawn were in the sky before he unfolded his cramped legs and crept wearily under the grisly robe. The following afternoon, when he stood with Jonathan in the crude log structure that served as recording office in Willamette Falls, he wondered if he'd been a fool. There were no beaver in the traps this morning, which was a poor omen. In spite of the medicine bundle tied securely to his braid, he wasn't sure he could carry this off. He listened nervously to the clerk's questions, the agreements. He heard the rustle of papers and the scratching of the quill as forms were made out. But all he was aware of was Johnny's labored pose of indifference, the clerk's curious eyes, and his own sweating stage fright. The devil with it. I'll make the mark, he thought. Better to do that much right than make a mess of this other. What's the difference anyway? Don't matter to me what Johnny thinks. No use. It mattered. He took the pen, felt his fingers close over it convulsively. If Johnny would only quit watching. Why, you're a squaw, he told himself angrily. You've counted coup on Arapaho and Sioux. You've killed a grizzly. You run from a piece of paper? Violently, he plunged the quill into the ink and bent over those hateful papers. Next minute, he had signed a bold, black Jim Keith at the bottom of the page, in writing, with every one of Dan'l's flourishes preserved and embellished. Johnny's quick-drawn breath was the most beautiful music he had ever heard. He straightened to meet his brother's eyes. The look in them was worth every moment of that grim and sleepless night. Johnny flushed to the hairline, suddenly, and headed for the door. Outside, he turned a face split by a wide, sheepish grin. There's times when I wish you didn't walk so quiet. I s'pose you was somewhere in the woods yesterday, hearing every word I said. I heard enough. And I s'pose, Johnny's smile twisted, I s'pose you got your own private opinion of me for caring how the blasted thing was signed? Mebbe. But so long as you did care, ain't no bourgeois gonna show me up at nothin'. What they can do, I can do. For a moment, Jonathan studied him as if he were a riddle, without an answer. Why did you do it, anyhow? This time yesterday, you didn't know A from Z, and I didn't think you cared. And how did you do it? As Jim only grinned, he nodded and started toward the horses, laughing. All right. Don't tell me. I'm pretty satisfied just the way things are. Plenty. He swung himself onto Bad Medicine, catching Buckskin's halter as Jim started past. Man, do you realize that what you just done? That land is ours now. Every tree and bush and stick and stone of it. A whole square mile. He dropped Jim's halter suddenly and grasped his own, giving the mule a kick that made him squeal indignantly. Come on, he yelled. Good criminy, let's get on home. We got a cabin to build. Johnny's excitement was contagious. In a burst of high resolve, Jim plunged vigorously into the tedious labor of felling trees, trimming and notching the logs, and dragging them by means of oxen to the cabin site. For a time he did well, and it all seemed worthwhile, if it earned Johnny's approval. But prolonged toil was a foreign thing to him, and since Johnny did not praise him, nor marvel each day at his unaccustomed efforts, but only took them cheerfully for granted, his enthusiasm soon began to wane. The log pile grew with disheartening slowness. Meanwhile, the river called him, and the unexplored places of the hills. Every time he caught sight of Dan'l, he'd think of something else he could teach the boy. Games and skills young Tox alone had learned in Absaroka. He began to drift away from the job whenever a vagrant thought beckoned. Looky there, Dan'l. See them birds shoot up out of that thicket downstream? They don't act that way less'n they're scared. They's likely a bobcat somewhere close. Hey, Dan'l, come up the creek with me a minute. I want to show you a brown bear's track. More and more he enjoyed the boy's eager companionship, and more it cut in on the work both of them were supposed to be doing. Dan'l would vanish upriver in response to Jim's hail, and Sally would have to tote baskets of wash or buckets of water by herself, panting under the load and fuming that a body could never find that boy these days when there was work to be done. Or Jim would drag a new log to the heaping pile and then let the oxen stand idle while he showed Dan'l a medicine root he'd found, or sniffed a changing wind, or followed the free circling of a hawk far overhead. One day he was lounging against the log pile, aimlessly tossing a white object in his hand, when Dan'l glanced up from his whittling. Hey, Jim, what's that little thing? Can I see it? Sure, it's a magic bone. A what? Dan'l dropped the trencher he was supposed to be finishing by noontime and ran over for a closer look. Why, it is a bone, ain't it? All carved and polished? What's it for? To play a game with? You try to guess which hand I'm holding it in, and I try and keep you from knowing. Here, I'll show you. So Jim arranged sticks and petals for wagers, telling of the trappers he'd seen lose a whole season's catch in half an hour, or the Indians who'd gambled themselves horseless, penniless, and even wifeless, playing the hand game. But it could make you rich, too, just as quick. You might go back to your lodge piled with hides and beads and weapons. All depends on how you make the magic, he confided, his voice dropping cautiously. The spirits'll work for ya, if you sing to them just so. Stretching his hands toward the boy, he worked them against each other, chanting softly, Natinachaneba, Ni Nana, Niachana, Ni Nana Nachin, Na Echana, Na Tichana, Ben Ah. He flung his closed fists, wide apart, and Daniel, who'd been watching breathlessly to discover in which direction the agile brown fingers had maneuvered the bone, shouted, "That one!" and pointed to the right fist. Jim grinned and scooped in the bet with a moccasin toe, revealing the bone in his left hand. "Watch closer. I'll do it again and you can try." Johnny found them still at it when he strode in from the woods half an hour later in search of the overdue oxen. Daniel stood triumphant guard over a growing pile of sticks and pebbles, and from his lips came a crooning guttural chant. For the love of creation, what's going on around here anyhow?" Jonathan exploded. "Is that young'un talking Injun?" Daniel turned eagerly. "It's a hand game song, Johnny. See all my horses and war shields on the ground there? Jim's got to guess which hand I've got the bone in, see? And, yeah, I see all right." Johnny's black eyes moved from the little hoard of rubbish to Jim's face. "Teaching the boy to gamble?" "Why not?" Beneath his outward carelessness, Jim was puzzled and a little worried. Johnny was angry. But why? In Absaroka, everybody played the hand game. Ponies changed hands so often, no boy rode the same one 2 days in a row. "What's wrong with the game, Johnny?" But Jonathan didn't answer him directly. He turned instead to the boy. "Listen to me, Dan'l," he said gently. "They's plenty of old-fashioned American ways to throw away your money without learning any Injun ones." "But shucks, Johnny." "Wait, I ain't through. Dan'l, remember the morning after Mother died when you and me talked? Remember what I said we had to do?" "Sure. You said we must take care of Sis." "What else?" "Well, and get us all out here where Ma wanted us to be, and build us a house and all." "Yes," Johnny said, nodding gravely. "And we ain't done that yet, have we? I'm still counting on you. Now you pick up that clasp knife and trencher and start earning your keep." His voice was stern, but he reached out to rumple the bright hair before he turned back to Jim. "I've got a log finished and waiting back yonder for a good 30 minutes. Let's get the oxen back to work." "Wah, let them rest for onct. What's the hurry? Come on up river with me. We'll get us a squirrel or two for supper." Johnny's palms rubbed slowly against his jeans. "Sorry, I got to build a cabin," he said briefly, and headed for the woods. Jim followed, irritably aware of his own promise to help. But why did everything have to be done Johnny's way? Promise or no promise, a fella had to cut loose sometimes and just be himself. At length, the tedious chore was done. The last log dumped on the pile, and the last shake split for shingling. Innumerable pegs whittled to substitute for unobtainable nails. The Rutledges had not been idle either, and the two families planned to join forces in raising cabins. Now all was ready. It took brawn and numbers to lift the heavy ridge poles into place and weight the loose-laid shakes of the roof with braced poles. One evening, Ned Rutledge crossed the river to announce that they were all set. "So are we," Johnny told him triumphantly, "but they's more of you, so we'll start first on yours. We'll be over bright and early in the morning." They were astir at daybreak. The delicate rose of the sky over the fir trees promised a clear day. The air was mild, and Jim found himself whistling softly as he gathered wood. The younger Keiths were bustling here and there, filled with the happy urgency of much to be done. Then, Dan'l, on his way back to the breakfast fire with a bucket of water, noticed Jim's bow hanging on a branch of the oak tree, under which were spread the grizzly robe and pack. "Hey, Jim," yelled the boy, running up the slope, waving the bow excitedly while water splashed in every direction. "Can you shoot this thing?" "Shoot it? Sure, if I got arrows." "You got any?" "Yeah." "Where? I never seen him. I never seen this before. Where's it been all this time?" "Slung underneath my possibles. I keep it wrapped up in a hide where it ain't when I ain't using it. That's why you've never seen it. They's arrows yonder in that quiver. Here, have some jerky." "In a minute. I want to go get them arrows." Dan'l dropped the bucket and dashed off again, leaving the stout, gaily decorated bow on the ground between Johnny and Sally. "What'd you carry that thing around for?" Johnny demanded. "I use it." "Use a bow and arrow when you've got a rifle?" Jim shrugged. "They's times when a bow's handier. You can let it fly an arrow when you're thinking about loading a rifle." "Oh, shucks, it don't take so long to load a rifle. Besides, they got sights. You can aim 'em." Something in Jonathan's tone provoked Jim to argument. "What makes you think I can't aim this? I got plenty of nicks in me says different. Let's have that thing, Dan'l." He slung the quiver to his back, picked up his bow, and rose, scanning the sky. Across the pink and gold of the dawn, a crow was flapping. Jim reached over his shoulder. All in the same smooth motion, he plucked a feathered shaft from the quiver, flipped it into place, and let fly. As the bowstring twanged, every head craned up. Next instant, the crow gave a convulsive jerk and dropped like a stone. "Cracky!" yelled Dan'l. "Nothing wrong with that shot." "Who says he can't aim it?" he jeered at Jonathan. "Why, Injuns get all the buffalo they want just with a bow and arrow. Injuns can—" "We ain't Injuns," snapped Jonathan, "and you don't forget it." He got up abruptly, walked with his quick, waiting stride over to the wagon, and began to gather tools together. After a moment, Jim flung a quiver and bow to the ground and followed. "What's so thunderin' bad about Injuns?" he demanded. Johnny's hands slowed, then stopped. Suddenly, Jim's anger was gone. In its place was a breathless waiting, a terrible anxiety to hear what Jonathan would say. The answer came without hedging. "They're savages. They're murderin', heathen savages." For a moment, Jim was too stunned to say a word. So that's what they thought of the people who'd raised him, what they thought of him. How could anyone think that? Sally was watching him with that same steady, grave regard. She believed it too, and Dan'l's small face was creased with confusion. Suddenly, everything in Jim rose in rebellion. He remembered the deep, quiet eyes of old Many Horses, the wise one, the patient training of Scalp Necklace, the laughter of the young men around the feast fire. He could almost feel Red Deer's gentle brown hands changing the leaf poultice on his torn chest, see her seamed and smiling face. He opened his mouth to protest, then stopped abruptly. All unbidden, other pictures flashed in his mind. Those same wrinkled brown hands reaching indifferently for a stone to crush the skull of a wounded pet dog. One of those laughing young men brandishing bloody yellow hair on a coup stick. The grim necklace of scalp from which a proud and patient old chieftain had got his name. He swung away, profoundly shaken. "They was good to me," he insisted. "Weren't for them, I'd be wolf's meat." "They wasn't so good to some of the folks in our wagon train." "Sioux, maybe," Jim burst out. "Comanches, not crows." "Injuns," said Jonathan relentlessly. One of the most painful, out of the painful confusion of Jim's thoughts, one fact rose clear, and he had to say it. "They're my people, Johnny. My people." "No, Jim. We're your people. Sally and Dan'l and me. And all the others in this valley." Jim's face became impassive. He was more crow than Keith, and he knew it. Maybe he always would be.